Lee. Okay, so sitting comfortably in your chair, looking to see how it feels when you're a little bit forwards, as I am, tilted forward slightly, so you're using your feet and your legs to support some of your weight, about a third of your weight. Just recognize that this is going to be stronger in your back, so you may want to just move around a bit or move back at some point. But this is the sort of point that we're aiming for. And just take a few moments to settle in. If it helps, just maybe take a couple of slow, deliberate breaths. Just feeling the slight pressure against the soles of your feet and sort of hips, buttocks, lower back. And one of the important things we're trying to do here is to get a feeling of releasing, softening, letting go, however you care to think about it. Before we go any further, just hold one hand up, roll the fingers into a fist and squeeze tightly, not too tightly, because it gets quite uncomfortable quite quickly. You can feel the tension going up through your arm. And if you then just create a hollow fist, so you could get your finger down the middle there, feel the change in your arm, your wrist, whatever, that sort of opening up or dissolving quality, however you sort of experience it, however you label it. And then try to think of the same kind of thing happening in the shoulders and upper back. Just sort of stiffen up there a little bit and release, stiffen up and release. And then go down again, lower back and hips, just stiffen up and release. And spend a little bit more time with this part of the body. And notice when you release, again, what happens in your shoulders. And also if there's any change to the feeling of your weight dropping down. Now, when we go into the tapping exercises, which we'll do in a moment, when you tap an area, maybe you can bring that same kind of quality of release. Sometimes the tapping kind of shakes that area a little bit, it makes the release come a little bit easier. So rubbing your hands together first. And then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder, your arm. On the other side. And then the upper part of your chest. Your belly. And finally your legs. Sit back in your chair, put your feet forwards, so you're in the reclining position. And again, when looking for that feeling of release, and if it helps, do that little exercise of just sort of like stiffening up in your shoulders and then releasing in your hips and so on and so forth. But one way or another, just get that sense of settling into your chair, sort of, in a sense, flopping into your chair, like in your favourite armchair, and you've been out for a walk. So, it's got that kind of quality to it. And it's actually quite difficult to do. There's almost always some parts of the body that actually don't cooperate in that. But don't really concern yourself with that for the moment. Just look for that overall feeling of flopping, if you like to think of it like that. Not a term you'll often find me using in terms of Tai Chi. As always, just noting if there's any change in things like your breathing. Sometimes we might notice a change in the sort of pulse of the circulation. You might get certain sensations in your fingers and so on and so forth. But along with all of that kind of physical response, just the attention that you're bringing to your body, whatever the nature of that attention is, will have the effect of just quietening, settling your thoughts for a moment. And then with that very much in mind, come back to the upright position. And one thing we can consider here, I'm going to use this term flopping again. It's not common to find that used in Tai Chi, but just have a sense of the big bones of your skeleton, the bones of your legs, the pelvis, your spine, ribs, collarbone, and maybe even just try it, just sort of like to pull your muscles in all around your body. And then when you release, get the sense that what you're doing is, if you like, flopping or dropping into the skeleton and through there downwards. Now just begin to slowly turn your head. And then hands on your shoulders. And as you move your elbows around, what can often happen is with this or any of the movements is that we find points of resistance, stiffness. And one of the ways that we would try and just sort of engage with that is through that process of releasing. And sometimes we'll be able to do that, sometimes not. It's not a given, but it's always something that's worth trying. If I go to here, I'm feeling my shoulders are tight, I now know what releasing feels like, and I can just sort of intend, almost instruct the body to release the shoulders. Sometimes that will just give me a little bit more movement, change in direction. This is a process that begins to become quite sort of, I wouldn't say quite automatic, because there's always a degree of awareness involved, but as kind of habitual as brushing your hair out your eyes is, or whatever, these little things that we do quite regularly. Hands down to your sides, and then we want to try not to do them unconsciously, because there's a value for the mind as well as for the body in this, which is that moment of settling. So the areas which are not moving particularly well for one reason or another are quite useful for drawing our attention back. When we don't want to just put up with them by any means. But try not to sort of think, oh, it's tightened up again. It's like, in a sense, it's another opportunity to come back to that sense of calmness and stillness that is such an important characteristic these are. Winding around. and back the other way. And rest your hand. So the weight of your arms on your legs. Now tilt forwards. The more of your weight goes into your feet. Give yourself a moment just to register what's going on here and look for that feeling of releasing in feet and legs in particular. And feel yourself being pushed back, settling into your hips. Look again in the area of lower back, hips and buttocks, looking for that feeling of releasing. So that all the movements in one way or another have these points of punctuation, like a comma in a sentence, where it's not so much that the movement stops as it is the quality of the movement changes. It becomes a downward movement. I'm getting you to identify certain points in this. There's a couple of phrases in the Tai Chi writings. One is that we seek the stillness within the movement. The other, very poetically, says that we move, we be still as a mountain, move like a great river. Both of those would suggest that actually the stillness and the movement coexist. What I'm doing at the moment is saying there's movement and then releasing stillness, movement and releasing stillness. So it's quite possible that we can get to a point where we don't need to identify those points of release because we never actually lose them. We never actually lose that quality of releasing, that quality of stillness. But if that's true, then it doesn't apply to me at the moment. But maybe that's an aspiration. But if we can get into the habit of coming back to that, again, however you think of it, stillness, releasing, coming back to the mountain, there are many ways that we sort of look at this process, imagine this process. Which way suits you is the best one to use. Because it means at the very least that we don't sort of run away with the movement. That there's on a regular basis, the habit becomes there is always going to be those few moments of just releasing. It's quite a short space of time in the end. And then just turn a little. I think in many ways it's easier to get that feeling when we're in the chair because we know the chair is supporting us. It can feel very precarious doing this standing without that extra support because we've got into the habit of thinking it needs that tightness, we need that stiffness. Turn the other direction. But what we notice here is that, for instance, when I go forward and I release in the leg, my leg continues to support me. I release in my back continues to support me. So there's a certain amount of risk taking. Turning the other way now. You have to sort of be prepared to make that little leap of faith, I suppose. But we do it in the chair first of all, because it's less of a leap, I think, so it's more accessible. We can then learn to apply it standing. Now going around. Notice at which point you may lose that quality as well. It's not a given that you will lose it. It's highly likely, I think. But we can certainly reduce the number of times that that happens. the other direction. So what we actually start to get is movement punctuated by these little glimpses of something a little bit quieter, a bit more still. In those moments, we may just be a little bit more aware of our posture as well. And these are things that we can take with us into our daily lives. Come back to the center. And then step out. And again, you step, and there's just that moment of considering the step. How does it feel for your foot to contact the floor? Can you get that little sense of a push down? And what's required for you to get that feeling of your foot sinking into the floor? What are your toes doing? What's the arch of your foot doing? On the other side? So it's as though our awareness works on a number of different levels. There's a kind of unconscious level, but then there's what I would think of as a sort of subconscious level, the things that we know are going on and we recognize when they're lost, but we're not actually actively thinking about the whole time. And then there's sort of like the stuff that we're immediately concerned with. And so we can begin to apply some of these ideas to, the more complex exercises. So hands down by your sides, palms forwards, knees forwards, rotating your arms again. Bird folds its wings. Now this time, in the forward position, leave your hands facing back, going back, and as you settle into your hips, feel your arms swinging through. So the push forward, settle into your feet, and your arms swinging through. It's fisherman casting there. So I've described it as though they're two very separate things, but in fact, they will overlap a little bit at the edges. The transfer of your weight, the settling in. Exactly how they do that can vary. Remember that when we break any movement apart in Tai Chi, we're then not getting the benefit of the whole movement. It can be an important stepping stone towards getting that benefit when we bring the different components back together. So it's not that it's a wasted process. But as the flow sets in, you'll find that there's this overlap. But just be aware that we can go too far with that and end up, say, doing fisherman cast a net like this and forgetting that we've got to sink and so on and so forth. So we want to find a balance there. There's some change into rolling the ball as you come back, leaving your arms in position, hidden and being drawn over. So as we grow increasingly familiar with the different exercises and the patterns, these aspects of the art, like this sort of quality of stillness within the movement, are things that we can begin to just discover within the movement itself and make use of to help us to develop the movement. This time change into pigeon, spread its wings. As your hands come up, turn them palm in, draw your elbows apart. So that quality of stillness and the overall feel underlying all the movements, the overall feel of the posture can be understood and felt and experienced in many ways. I like the image of the mountain. I also like the image of the sort of viewpoint, the watch point. Like, you know, if you go for a drive somewhere, and sometimes you see these signs saying, you know, viewpoint, area of natural beauty, and so on. You might stop, get out, go and just stand there for a while, rather than moving through the landscape. You're able to just watch. You're able to just look out over the landscape, see what there is to see. Change to pushing wave. And then rolling your fingers into a hollow fist, just a little bit above your legs, pushing them straight out and rotating. At the end of this next forward movement, open your fingers, wind them out, and come back in as you sit back and push forward. This time, when you reach this back position, turn your hands palm down, turn, ease forward, feel your hips sinking back in the chair as you extend through your back and then through your arms and come back to the center. Change direction, polishing the table. Once more. Now, turn your hands palm up. Look for that feeling of settling downwards through the hips, your back, your shoulders, and then feel that there's, you know, feel the course of the subsequent sort of push up. It's like getting a block of wood or ball, you push it down into water and you start to feel the pressure of the water pushing up. So there's this rising energy that builds up through the body, and then gravity takes over and draws your hands down. So by taking just a moment here at the bottom of the movement, not only do we get the benefits of the stillness and the adjustment to the posture and so on and so forth, but we also give a little bit of space for that rising energy to expand up through our body. And in fact, here at the top of the movement, we give a little space for the energy of the pull of gravity to draw us down. And turn your hands out, change into the wild goose. We can bring in whatever images are useful to enhance the movement. And again, that's going to be more effective with that growing quality of quietness, of stillness in our minds. Less preoccupied with, well, whatever was preoccupying us before. There's always something, isn't there? And just noticing perhaps how we can easily drift in back into those without realizing it, and suddenly it's almost like you wake up again. Oh, I should be doing Tai Chi. Just bringing yourself back. And then parting the clouds. So that quality of the stillness within the movement offers us many things that are of real practical use in our lives. Not just some kind of philosophical idea. There's good evidence to suggest that those moments of quietness in our attention, in our thoughts, have a profound effect on our well-being. This time, don't go forwards, let your hands drop to the sides, and dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Changing sides, but not rushing. In that space between the movement of your arms, again, there's that quality of stillness, and our attention gently moves to the opposite side. At first, when we start thinking like this, it feels a little bit disjointed. But in fact, that thing about the flow of the movement will reassert itself, and you'll find that actually the stillness enhances the flow. Flow can become very frantic, fragmented. One more time. Bring your hands around and show out. This time, pressing up, just comfortable a little bit above your head, keeping your hands in front of your body though. The longer, broader feeling in your back. Same thing here, don't pull your hands back. This time, as you push your hands out, just extend one foot. Knees stay slightly bent. Ease forwards. Don't just scooping water up in your arms. Your hips drop back with the shoulders following, your arms following your shoulders. Scooping the sea and looking at the sky. And then let your hands drop down again, a loose fist. Push forwards, this time your head going slightly up. Drawing your arms over for grasping the tiger's ears. Again, a loose fist. First movement is an expansion outwards. As your head goes forwards, that brings your hands forward. Then just naturally follow the curve back in. Switch sides. And just remembering when you reach, as a convenient way of working this out, when you reach the end of each stage of the movement here, more weight in your heel here, weight in your hips and so on. Give yourself that little moment to settle into whatever the posture is. And then changing. And then just come back to sitting. So then, rubbing your hands together again. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Shoulder. And your arm. The other side. Upper part of your chest. Belly. And finally, once again, your legs. The balls of your feet into the floor to push your heels up. Your knees will come up. It's getting a bit of circulation, feeling back in your legs. And then circling around. And back the other way. Okay. Now come to the standing position. So we want to try and reproduce those qualities of settling, quietening, however you think about them, in the standing position. Structurally, it's obviously going to be different because we haven't got the chair there anymore, but the processes and the outcomes feel very much the same. We have to be more particular about our posture, just as if you wanted to flop into your armchair, you would make sure that the armchair was there. You wouldn't just go along and with your eyes closed, just randomly flop back and hope. So an awareness of where you're going to drop into is always very important. But again, that awareness is aided by that quietness. So this is not a one-way street. We become more aware of the body, and becoming more aware, we're more able to go more deeply into the body and get that sense of dropping. But the very act of dropping means that we become more aware of our structure and we can start to work with it again. So to start off with, I would recommend actually that you support yourself, because it's probably going to get a bit wobbly, but just standing with your feet hip width apart and do that same thing, sort of pulling in around the hips, lower back and buttocks, and then releasing. Don't worry if you wobble around a little bit. We'll sort that out in a moment. Just look for that feeling of releasing. Notice the effect it has up through your back and into your shoulders, down into your legs, through your knees, hips. Notice what's happening in your pelvis. Is there a change in the angle of the pelvis? And then try and have a sense of where you want your weight to be, ideally just behind the ball of each foot. So now we're getting very precise in where we're dropping to, where we're releasing to. And see if you can do that, still standing, still ready to hold on to the chair, but then just without actually holding on. And again, don't be sort of stuck on, you've got to get it right every time. You might find, for instance, that you start to wobble around, but then are able to correct it, which is quite a useful thing to know how to do. Okay, so that releasing process really could be seen as being the start of everything in Tai Chi, everything to do with mind and body and energy and so on and so forth. So coming now to the parallel posture, see if you can look for that feeling of releasing and just let it continue a little bit. Let it draw your hips down a little bit more, and then feeling the response from your legs, just as we did in the chair, that sense of buoyancy, that rise in energy coming up. Just taking a moment to allow that to happen. And letting your arms begin to follow. Doing these first three exercises, a little sequence of three. So at the bottom here, as you settle, you make the change. Sometimes you can feel a real urge to rush there. Especially if you're a little bit, oh, what's he going to do next? You know, you're not quite sure. Just remind yourself, it's not the end of the world if you get the sequence wrong. Obviously, we want to try and get it right. And actually, your best chance of getting it right is just to come back to that point of stillness. Stillness within the movement. One more round. Good. One foot forward. Make sure the space across your legs. You can see through my legs there. Like that, you can't. When like that, I'm bouncing on a tightrope. Bring your weight to the middle and just do a couple of times again. If you want to support yourself, that's fine. That can help. This will tighten up a little bit and then release. Tighten up and release. You can try it a few times on your back leg. Sometimes, for some people, maybe not you, it can be helpful to link this with your breathing. You breathe in as you tighten up, so you begin to associate the out breath with the releasing. Again, it might not work for you, so don't worry if it doesn't. Try that on the front leg. And notice the change in the feeling of your foot in contact with the floor. And then begin to transfer your weight, but give yourself the time and space to get that sense of releasing. And it really only takes a moment. I put a lot of emphasis on it, but it's not a complicated operation. And a lot of it relies on our intent to feel that way. Now, there is a technical side to it, of course. If you find, for instance, that you go into the back leg and really can't get it, it's like, well, is there something I need to do structurally, my foot, or my knee, or something like that that can help that? Now go into your front foot, and as you settle in the front foot, also push your back knee forwards, and your heel will come off the ground. Try that again. This time, when you push your knee forwards, notice what happens in the hip. So you can begin to feel that when your knee goes forwards, again, there's this feeling of dropping, of releasing through that empty hip. And then turn that around in your mind. Go forwards, look for that feeling of releasing, dropping through your hip that you're becoming familiar with, and notice how it pushes your knee forwards and raises your back heel. Then, this is to my mind a bit more difficult. When you're in the back leg, can you do the same thing with the front hip? Can you get that feeling of releasing and feel how it again begins to raise your toes? This points us at a very practical daily activity, which is walking. And what we often do when we go to move a foot is this. We come up, but you see, I'm already stumbling forwards. So there are times, obviously, when we're walking to the shops or something like that, when we want to bring in our arms. We want to swing our arms or, use our shoulders or something like that. I've got no argument with that. But that doesn't necessarily have to involve lifting up. When we lift up, we raise our center of gravity and we become less stable. So now we have a direct link between that moment of stillness, that cultivation of the ability to find that stillness within the movement that we started off with in the chair, and being able to walk with more stability. You can begin to bring your foot in. It's very, very common to find that we begin to rush at this, especially if we feel a bit wobbly. I've talked before about how you might want to stand next to a wall and do this. But gradually, if we practice this, then we build more confidence in the ability of our body to support us when we're able to release. Shake out. Now, try that with the other foot forwards. Take your time. Quite often I take people through these exercises. We do it on one side and it's great. And then suddenly we're sort of, oh, we're going to do this, jumping over several stages. But each stage of this is important. So, first of all, get that tightening and releasing with your weight in the middle. Noticing, an increase in the pressure in your legs. What's happening with your knees? What's happening with the shoulders? Try a little bit in your back leg, very carefully. This is something that has to be, to do it like this, to do it this slowly, is actually very strong in the muscles of the legs. So you need to watch out for your knee because the muscles may need to get a bit stronger. You'll be pleased to know probably your legs will ache a little bit more after the session today. It's a cheery thought, isn't it? Try the same thing in your front leg. If you do, for instance, have a problem with your knee, then actually this releasing feeling, a lot of that is around the joints, will allow the weight and the energy to flow through the knee rather than get blocked in the knee. But you have to build that up slowly and carefully. And then transferring your weight, giving yourself that moment, that time. Remember, you might choose to associate it with the out breath. There's all sorts of ways you can approach this. So there isn't a right or wrong. You might use the breath, you might use that image of sort of flowing downwards, whatever is most useful to you. And as we did today, I think a good place to practice this is in chair-based movements. And especially if you do have, say, a bit of a problem in your knee, then again, you need the confidence to think, actually, my knee's hurting, but if I can soften, I can actually release some of that painful quality. Maybe not all of it. Or if it doesn't work, are you overextending your knee? Is your knee out of line? And so again, we can start to think, oh, right, there's stuff we can change here. Go into your front leg, releasing through your back hip, feeling how that tends to push your knee forward and raise your heel. More of your weight will, of course, go into your front leg. Go back, releasing in the hip, and feeling that drawing your toes up. As I said, I find this much more accessible, much more immediate in my back leg and back hip. That was where I first began to sort of play with this idea. But having experienced it in the back leg, I now know what to look for and what to intend, what to encourage in my front hip. So it's starting to become more and more a feature of the raising of my toes. One of the advantages of this is that the tendency will be to keep your pelvis level. Now, again, in standard walking, we might angle forwards a little bit. It's a very efficient thing to do. But what we don't want to be is constantly like this. This provides the counterbalance to that. And it's between the two of them that we can walk but remain stable. We have a tendency to go forwards, but we can often go too far forwards. But we learn that by releasing, we can sort of draw back from that slightly precarious edge a little bit, and then begin to step in. Take a few steps forwards. I'm taking you through this quite quickly. These are really things to take away with you. They're working for you. And to practice and to practice regularly, and not too much at one time, because it can be stronger in your legs. I'm going to change direction now. It's worth spending a few minutes each day with these ideas. You'll find that the cumulative effect can give you more stability, more and better mobility. But don't expect it just to work straight away or without practice. So let's put it to the test very carefully. Starting in your back foot, arms down by your sides. Go forwards, releasing through the front hip and the knee. Even as you move, you don't have to wait until you arrive there, but as you arrive, you turn. That swings your arms out, or wind blows the willows. Go back, and as you arrive in your back lane, you turn. Because one of the things that we begin to feel here is, again, the response within our body, that sense of a rising, expanding energy that moves our arms for us. So now settling into your back foot, softening, dropping through your front hip, raising the toes and bringing your foot in. Step forwards, releasing from both hips, especially the back hip, so your heel comes up and step in. So a significant part of the step in, the moving of your foot, is accomplished through that sense of releasing. So try the same thing with your left foot forwards, starting your back foot, going forward, releasing through both hips and turning, not raising your heel yet. Just the standard fixed step, wind blows the willows. If you're ready, just, this time you can let the back heel come up, bring the foot in. You also have a moment to check, in the process of doing that, have you sort of twisted over or something like that? Don't be in a hurry. And then dragonfly skims the water. Bring the rear foot in or the front foot in, depending on which way you're going. And if you're comfortable with this, oops, I'm not particularly, I am raising. Yeah. So I'll put my foot down there because I was a bit wobbly. And putting my foot down just enabled me to release a little bit more, and then I was fine. And then go in the other direction. Remember, if you release in your hips, you're less likely to strain in your shoulders. We found that out already in that connection. And if you're less strained in your shoulders, you're less top heavy, more stable. And bring your feet parallel. Shake out. Okay. Go back to your chair. So remember T.T. Liang's words that he loses balance all the time and gets it back all the time. Maybe there isn't possibility of continually keeping that sense of center, but I'm going to sort of hang on to it. I think I'm going to keep it in front of me as something to aim for. Whether I get there or not is beside the point. But embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Let your hands drop to the side, and this is the same process. You push up, your arms come around. Right about here, that releasing in your hip, your back, your shoulders, drawing your arms in and down. So this is an exercise that we finish with that very much puts the emphasis on that sense of coming back. Releasing, softening, letting go. Whatever the label that suits you best is. One more time. And rest. And open your eyes. As always, it goes very quickly. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope that was useful to you. Practice those ideas, and I'm always interested in hearing any kind of feedback.